Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation and another of your exploring your Lake Forest neighborhoods. We do one or two of these a year, and we look at different neighborhoods and how they've evolved and various private enclaves in our city. I'm Jan Gibson, Vice President of Programs, and we're delighted that you're here today, especially with us, as we celebrate Meadowood Farms. We ordered up the weather for you today. I'm just kidding, of course, but isn't it grandiose? We think we are hitting a home run with this program for obvious reasons, the attendance today. But second, we have about 4 different reasons. One, that our mission states that we protect the historic visual character of Lake Forest. And this is why we're here. Second, we honor and applaud our properties awarded by the National Trust. Third, we have an intellectual educational program for you today, which meets our mission. And fourth, we have a lot of fun. So we're excited about today's program. If I use more than 3 superlatives in a sentence, please say something. But as I introduce this Meadowood Dairy Farm, you're in for a real treat, but I think probably 95% of you, or maybe 99% of you, know that it's a real treat. I said to the paper this week that you really won't want to leave the property today. It's that enchanting. First, I want to introduce all the homeowners. All the homeowners who graciously are allowing us to be on their property and in some of their homes today. As I go through, I'll mention the names and then I'll eventually have you all stand up. But Jim and Carol Herber spent 2 years researching to apply for the National Trust. And they were awarded that, and it's they received the merit. And the other homeowners also assisted in preserving and restoring their properties and taking part in this endeavor. I'm going to do a quick membership pitch, and the reason I'm doing this is that our membership drive is coming up, and this is what you get with preservation. We help with the city, we observe meetings, we have programs, we have different events and newsletters, and all kinds of things that we give to the entire community. If you are a member now, we'd love to have you upgrade. If you're not a member, we'd love to have you as a member because the more the merrier, and we love our community so much. And also, today we have Guy Berg, who's a senior designer with Mellicar and Associates. We thank Diana Mellicar's firm for assisting with all these historic slides that you're going to see. And Diana is here today, and she's been so gracious. Raise your hand, Diana. Good. You've been just wonderful in terms of supporting our efforts, too. Thank you very much. Guy Berg, who is our speaker, is no stranger to preservation. You see him on TV quite a bit because he's on the Historic Preservation Commission board. He has been on the Building Review Board and the HPC before. He has been on our panel with the when we had a panel 2 years in a row of the good, the bad, and the ugly, which we were going through different homes. So he's done quite a bit in town. He's a great architect with a great firm. And I have to tell you a funny story. When I first asked him if he would do this program for us, he said, "Oh, I've always wanted to see this enclave. This is such a magic place." As we step back into the 16th century and also kind of into the 20s when this was built, but 16th century France. But anyway, he said, "I've always wanted to see this." So we went out to take a look, and we walked around the property and talked to the homeowners. And he said, "I don't want to leave. This is wonderful." We couldn't pull him away. So I think he had a good time. Later on, though, he said, "This is a lot of work, to put this together." And I said, "I know that." So anyway, we thank him so much. He's done such an incredible job. You're going to see it for yourself, and then you're actually going to experience it when we're over at Meadowood Farm. So with that, Guy, it's yours.
Thanks, Jan. Thank you, Jan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for showing up today. It's quite a full room, and that's good to see. Can everybody hear me all right in the back? That's not working. Is this better? Okay. I'll try to speak a little more loudly, and perhaps maybe we can work on increasing the volume as we go along here. I've lectured in front of you for about 4 of these educational lectures, and I've enjoyed all of them. This particular project has been very interesting for me because it's actually a site that I was somewhat familiar with, having grown up in Lake Forest for most of my life and having the good fortune to work in town for almost 2 decades. I feel I've been somewhat intimate with a lot of our historic infrastructure in this community. But as I started to do research on Meadowood Farm, I kept on learning more and more and more about it and the property, and I hope that the presentation today will pique your interest and be a good preview to our wonderful site visit that Jan has so ardently arranged for our enjoyment. What I'd like to do first, before I get into a description and definition of Meadowood Farm, et cetera, and try to give you some interesting plans, et cetera, is I'd like to show you a few seductive slides that I selected of the farm. Basically what we have here is a gentleman's farm built in the 1920s that is currently existing on its own as adaptive residential reuse. The slide in front of you right here is of the main element of the dairy farm that was built, and that is the cow barn, if you will. It's hard to imagine that people would actually want to live in a cow barn or a chicken coop or a milk house or a wagon shed, but that actually, whatever it takes to make this work better is fine. I can turn around the other way too. But just for the moment, indulge me, and I'd like to just address the slide that's on the screen right now. What we have here, I think I'm safe to say, is a real tour de force of architectural planning, massing, and elevational treatment. Now, I'm not going to discuss each and every building in this manner. I just want to do a little bit right now, and then when you're out visiting the site, feel free, and I encourage you to sort of give it a discriminating once-over, if you will. This, as I said, was the main cow barn. Now, this is where Elsie and all her girlfriends lived and resided. They don't live here anymore. You're not going to see any cows when you go out there. At least I hope we don't see any cows, unless Norm's planning on sneaking a few in for the tour. But at any rate, you can see here that what we have is a great round barn shape, and it is surmounted by a 140-foot bursting almost with the promise of a bountiful harvest roof. It's really quite almost like a piece of architectural symbolism in one regard. And also quite a stunning feature on the elevation is the entry penimented mass surmounted again by the dormer of the hayloft. It's almost like a rocket ship poised for takeoff, and the amount of material that is applied to the facade is also very carefully and skillfully handled. We have a nice battered base of random coursed ashlar, and right in the middle of that we have a cut stone pointed Gothic arched door, which you're not going to typically see on a cow barn. It almost leads one to believe that the creators of this farm regarded the goings-on inside this main part as almost having a religious significance. So the thing is really loaded with a lot of great material. And then as one looks up this pediment, it is just amazing what they've done with these curving barge boards of the roof. They actually work not only to give a unique outline to the pediment to draw attention to it, but they also make like a little catcher's mitt for the Gothic pointed arch so that that element doesn't look quite incongruous. It's very skillfully handled. And then the towering dormer above it uses a reverse curve to kind of create a little bit more energy, and the whole thing starts taking on almost an anthropomorphic form akin to some kind of a Midwestern penguin getting ready to get up off its haunches and walk away. And all around our curving eave line here too are bracketed details. In fact, most of the interesting elements on the facade as far as detail are really references to structural nature of constructing buildings. Very little ornament exists on this structure. Not too evident in this photo is the great vented cupola on top, which you'll see because there isn't any snow today, and also you'll be able to get a better angle on it. But that rivals anything on our towers in Market Square. So I'm really excited about your being able to go out there and examine each and every one of these pieces. It's handled with this consistency throughout. And also what I'd like to do before I get into an analysis of this is show you some scenes, again in winter, and these were photographs that were given to me by Bart Willison, and he lives in the Carriage House, and these were taken some years ago, but what I'd like to do is, again, let you get seduced a little bit by what the daily life is like living on this farm. I mean, it would have looked like this back in the 20s when it was first built, and you can even see here it's not just an exterior experience, but this is what these fortunate people get to enjoy from the insides of their homes. Here's another set of images that this one in particular I think would rival any medieval skyline in Europe. Now that I've given you a little bit of a snippets of Meadowood Farm, what was and what is Meadowood Farm? Well, as I said, it was a 1920s built gentleman's farm, complete with cow barn, carriage house, chicken coop, milk house, farm workers' cottages, blacksmith shop, pony barn, carpenter shop. As you can see, there's quite a bit of activity on this farm group. But what's really interesting is that now it has been converted into single-family gracious homes in the western side of Lake Forest. This is a rather interesting photo. It's during the 1960s, and it shows it in rather close proximity where you can get a feeling for the great kind of curving arrangement here of the farm structures. And in the distance here we have the milk house, chicken coop in the back, and these are a little hard to see. These are the farm workers' cottages. If we pull out a little bit and look at this slide, it's the same view, but what it does is it gives you a perspective. This is Waukegan Road. We're looking west, and we can see here that there is the beginnings of some subdivisions encroaching on the property, but beyond that you can appreciate some of the undisturbed open lands that in some respects are still there today, and we'll talk about that a little later on. This is actually, if we fast forward from the previous slide to 2010, this is the farm group building up here. Waukegan Road is just at the bottom of the slide, and you can see how now the introduction of a great amount of tree canopy and other homes has completed the subdivision to the point where it's a little hard to pick this out as it was in the other slide. If we zoom in a little bit more, we can see more nearly the sort of catcher's mitt grouping here and the cottages around this area. Now, lest you think that all this has sort of ruined the pastoral quality, this is the intersection of the roads Inverleith and Greenvale that you're going to be arriving at first. And if we were to go down to the ground, and you'll see this in a little bit, this is the view you're going to be presented with. And actually, it's even better in real life, and it has much of that charm you would see in the European countryside associated with it. So it's actually, for a lot of reasons, a rather successful adaptive reuse proposal. Now, to get you oriented with exactly where the heck are we are right now right here at Gorton. The Meadowood Farm, the original 150-acre farm parcel I've outlined here in yellow. This is the subdivision network of streets that we just saw in the photo, and then the outline right here depicts the farm group building. What I've done with these two maps is repeated the previous map, the current day location, and then I found a 1928 map that would depict the Leonard Farm property in its undisturbed original state. Again, there's Waukegan Road, here's Deer Path Road, and that's the farm group building shown right there. Now this is actually an enlargement of this area that we have today, and what this slide does is it shows you how the farm group has actually been subdivided into parcels that allow these buildings to function as individual single-family homes. It didn't have to be turned into a condo or apartments or people living in like a duplex. They all have their own little parcel, and they have access to the garaging via this cul-de-sac of Hathaway Circle. And while we see parcel lines here drawn, this bird's eye view from the south actually shows you how without the parcel lines really being visible and without anybody putting any fencing up and allowing the original property to kind of flow between the cottages, we have a nice situation here where the thing still retains the character of a group of buildings. This is really, I think, an important feature of subdivision of important farm enclaves in this respect, or even estate homes. I think there's another superlative example in Noble Judah Estate on Westminster. That's really a pleasure to go see. You just don't know whose property is whose, and you really get the sense of the buildings acting in concert. We'll jump back to our comparative plans again, and I was just showing you the 2010 view, which tends to be a little congested with subdivision. So if we look at this and wonder, well, what would that have looked like back in the 20s or 30s? We were fortunate enough to find some photographs, and it looked like this. This would probably be from a little bit north of Deer Path and Waukegan Road. And as you can see, the pastures to the southeast are quite vast and open. And the silhouettes afforded by all the ventilation towers, et cetera, are creating quite a romantic image. And if we zoom in on that, we can see that we have our cottages in the foreground, and then you can see that the great roof of the dairy barn actually originally continued all the way across and connected to the carriage barn. This comes up as an important aspect later on in the lecture, so remember that. And as interesting as it was to find an early photograph from the ground, I was fortunate enough to find an actual aerial photograph from 1939. I had no idea we were up flying around taking photographs at that time, but this one is very interesting for a lot of reasons. This, again, is the original 150 acres of the Leonard Farm, the Meadowood Farm. This is the little enclave of farm buildings, and we were viewing it from about here a moment ago. What's evident in this plan is that there seems to be a little bit of a driveway feature going on here and a road trickling up. But also of great interest here is the neighboring parcels. This property to the south is the great J. Ogden Armour Melody Farm Estate, and you can see it has a somewhat larger scale version of this alley and curving entrance drive. Jens Jensen was heavily involved in the land planning for this, and it's no surprise that he was retained to work on this parcel as well. And also, just to orient you, this group of buildings up here is our Elloa Farm group. So we had Gentleman Farm parcels at a pretty dense arrangement at this intersection here. If we just stop for a second, maybe I'll just talk a little more on this slide. This is the north branch of the Chicago River, and this is the railroad tracks over here. The edge of the original Meadowood property is along the Shields Township, Libertyville Township border. And you wonder that we've seen that this area got subdivided in our bird's eye view, and you would wonder, well, we know this is all preserved and some of this is now. What's happened to the west half of the Meadowood property? And actually what became very interesting to me is that it is currently all preserved, and it's part of that corridor we all walk down along the Chicago River when we go from Elloa through the Savannah and down to the Melody Farm Nature Preserve. What I find interesting and possibly could be maybe a subject for more deliberation is the actual branding and recognition of this as actually belonging to the Meadowood Farm, so that it's given its due place in our community history. And in fact, if I was a property owner in here, I would think it would behoove me to have that sort of a designation done. So if I can confuse the signage issues over at Elloa with this, I feel like I've had a pretty good afternoon. But I thought this was interesting because we're going to talk about the buildings today, but from a land conservation standpoint, if this was just pulled off in the last couple of months, this would be heralded as a fantastic enterprise. I mean, to be able to think that the half of that original farm is conserved in perpetuity is pretty remarkable. That's what I said about this project. The more research I did, the worse I realized what I was getting myself into. In this particular slide, the group of buildings is right about here. What this slide does is it takes the 1939 view and we zoom in closer where we get a little bit more detail. Here's the original farm group of cow barn, carriage house, etc., the cottages, the farm workers' cottages. This is the milk house and this is the chicken coop. And now we really can see that this is a tree-lined alley that's been created. Here's the actual road link over to the farm group. And this little pad right here is actually the beginnings of the foundation for the manor home. This is where Clifford Milton Leonard, was planning to build his manor home for the estate. Can you see the pointer right there? Okay. All right, I'm going to go point to it. And I hope you guys can see this. Okay, now that would be your driveway, so we know the house is going to be at the end of it. You can see that all right? Yeah. Okay, now also notice that. There's no building there, and it's kind of a ghosted imprint of some previous structure. And what we'll do is we'll try to figure out what in the heck that was too. On this photograph, though, I'd like you to notice that over on the west edge of the photograph is a lake. As I said, there's a tree-lined alley and some other cow paths that have already been established to bring the grazing cattle out to the other edges of the property. Now, if we take a look at this land plan drawn up by Jens Jensen, we see a lot of the elements in his original conception for the property already in place. Here's his drawing of the tree-lined alley, and obviously the manor home was intended to be placed at the end of that driveway, and there's the outline of the lake. That much was built. He also intended to put in vegetable and flower gardens here. We do see he planned that same little S-curving road, and there was also a great deal of other types of landscape elements, tennis courts and some pools, council rings, and various kinds of gentleman farm accoutrement that were going to be executed, but actually never really did happen. He also planned for there to be a little orchard up here. Now, missing from this master plan are the milk house and the chicken coop. So early on in the planning, it must have been on the front burner that the great cow barn was the main focus of this, along with the farm workers' cottages. And here we have a picture of Jen's. Now, we go back to that blow-up of the 1939 slide. Can you see the pointer a little better now? Yes. Good. Okay. Well, I'm not going to leave it on all the time. It'll wear the battery out, okay? So here we have our tree-lined alley again. Here we have the foundations that were started for the manor home. So property owners are actually, what this slide does is it overlays the road system that's currently in place. And it also has the neighboring parcels delineated on it. And what I thought would be interesting is for the people that live in this area, should they desire to see if any of these elements may exist on their property or nearby, I'd be more than happy to supply copies of this for you. And also discuss the ghosted imprint of what looks like it may have been a previous structure. And indeed, when I visited Bart Willison's house, they have an oil painting that they found at some kind of an art show, and it clearly shows what looks like a 3-bay. This is clearly the outline of a previous farm structure. It looks a lot like a 3-bay thrashing barn that exists to this day in some quantity in the Libertyville Township on Milwaukee Road alone. There's a few of these things. But in the distance, one can see the tower that's attached to the milking barn and its cupolas. And over the top of this ridge, there's the great ventilated cupola, and then this is actually the part of the carriage barn. So what we have here is evidence that there was prior farming activity on the property, which I found to be rather interesting. Now, this slide is valuable because I've juxtaposed the plan with the Sanborn map, and what I'd like to do with this is make the conjecture that the road we have right now, Hathaway Circle, was actually never intended to be there in place. And what we have instead is a clear axial condition set up here between the farm worker cottages that would focus on the dome so that this becomes kind of a ceremonial passage for the cows when they go out to pasture. And also, if you look in this photograph, you can see the shadows of what is the spectacular pediment element on the carriage house. And it's not centered on this element here, as this is sort of centered on these gates. And when you visit the site, you're going to be coming down Hathaway, and you'll notice that that piece is off-center. And I'll get a few more slides up here to talk further about that. But you can see the cow path that's in place here. They never did put in the gardens, so those pathways didn't get put in place. But if you recall from the landscaping slide, he did have some paths intended, and one in which if it passed by this cottage without the garage, I believe would focus on that pediment. So there were some interesting sort of land planning efforts going on. Now, this is a current plan of roof plan, aerial view of the compound, and it shows also the good effect, the happy effect of no fencing. You can actually feel the ground cover passing by each cottage, which helps unify the design and keeps the identity as a group of buildings. And here I've also labeled the various elements here. I've spoken about it before. I was very worried that you guys weren't going to be able to keep these buildings straight, so I repeat a few of these plans. And in fact, what I've done is I've made this the key plan, and not only is it given a name, but I try to give everybody a little look at the elemental front facades of each of these structures. As I said, this is the round barn with its two flanking appendages here. This was always connected, and that would be connected to the carriage house. Here's that pedimented element that I described earlier as being the focus of a potential axis from this direction. These are views of the farm workers' cottages. There's 3 of them total along here. They're actually very cleverly done. When you drive up, you're going to be thinking that they're all completely different. They're asymmetrically massed, and it's a very interesting trick to create a random sort of pastoral quality when indeed they're exactly the same building footprint, exactly the same roof configuration. They vary, some are 2, some are 3 bedrooms, but there's a great deal of repetitive, rational planning involved there, but at the same time he's doing another thing, he's creating the effect of it not being there. So this is kind of a nice juggling of motives by the designer. I really came to respect everything that he's done here. This is the milk house. As you can see from this photograph, it has the appropriate French Norman trappings, and this is a picture of the chicken house over here in the great array of windows one would want for southern exposure. Now, it's almost typical of all these structures that they've retained so much of their original integrity on their front facades. Very little has changed, and that's a credit to the homeowners. Each one of these buildings was basically retrofitted for single-family residence by the individual homeowner. It wasn't done as a development. It was done building by building at different times. So they should be commended, and some of them, as Bart is here, he was one of the original converters of this structure. When he bought it, it was all open. This was the carpenter's shop. These were the wagon sheds. They never had doors, and it had dirt floors, and it was in a state of benign neglect. And as I said, he should be commended for bringing that building back to the condition it's in and to sensitively remodel it as he's done. Now, we've been looking at Sanborn maps and some aerial photographs. What I did here is I tried to do a reconstructed plan of the farm group building and talk a little bit more about what I thought these axial conditions and relationships would be. So when you visit today, you'll be coming down the middle on the cul-de-sac road, but bear in mind there are existing piers and some split rail remnants here that I think if you use your imagination, you can see that this probably was at work. Here are the farm workers' cottages and their connecting walls and cowgate here. It really forms a nice enclosure, making a fine exercise yard for the cows in the wintertime. And up here, of course, is my key plan. So you see that it's sort of the imprint, but this was the original arrangement as best I can conjecture. Here are some of these are actually tower elements that were always part of these buildings. This is the silo for the hay barn, and this is the silo that was attached to the milk house. There may have been some livestock also housed in here, so silage would have been necessary for feeding. And these towers, here's some period photos, are really romantic structures. You can see they were operable. They have the dormers and they have the booms for the pulleys, and they have the interior man channels, so you can go up there at night or in a storm to get to the top of the silage. But they're done in a marvelous architectural treatment. Here they are today, virtually unchanged. The place is in remarkable shape. Now this is a view of the family of Clifford Milton Leonard. He's our gentleman farmer. He fit the mold of that group of wealthy industrialists and investors at the turn of the century that would be choosing a gentleman farm for their rural retreat. He was an engineer. He owned a construction company. He was on the boards and was chairman of a lot of financial institutions and oil companies. So he had the ability to pay for this sort of thing. He was also a great admirer of the French Norman country style. He visited France shortly after the First World War and he decided to build a gentleman's farm and to do it in the French Norman style. And in fact, the only ornament that's on a lot of the buildings, and this is the only one I could find on the milk barn, is above the front door. You'll find a plaque with some fleur-de-lis and some inscriptions on this. He also traced his ancestry back to early American times with William Penn on both sides of his family. Now, let's talk a little bit briefly about this gentleman's farm movement that I've been referring to. This is a 1930 map of Lake County, and it shows the great variety of estates that were owned, and a lot of them were gentlemen's farms. This is the yellow portion here is our Meadowood Farm, and if we look at a blow-up of that again, here you can see the actual map outline of Melody. There's the Knollwood Club, but here's A. Watson Armor. They're all tucked in here pretty tight. And in a short definition form, the gentleman farm movement was really was our version in America of the time-old agrarian country retreat for the wealthy, so that they could escape the hectic, congested, polluted conditions in the urban environment that would have existed at this time. It was sort of a bucolic retreat, and I don't think that's anything that's of a surprise to anyone, but I just want to start out with that as a kind of a baseline definition. And here again is a view, and this is incorrectly drawn, it should go like this, of our farm area here. And one of the things that I found myself trying to answer was, well, what was it originally? Was it originally part of a bigger farm that was all subdivided? And I found some older maps, and actually, if I went back into the records at the Lake County Discovery Museum, and in 1842, this original parcel was purchased by a Hugh McLennan. So what's interesting about Meadowood Farm is it's actually kind of an intact piece that once the Indians moved out in 1830, and then the land sales happened, this piece has kind of survived. Different owners, different venues, but I thought that was a very interesting aspect of it, and the fact that that existing barn and this Hugh McLennan's purchase of it, it probably always was some kind of a farm. And just speaking about that kind of prairie farmstead activity, these are some typical shots that conjure up the notion of the hard work of these gritty and taciturn pioneers. Everything was probably very difficult, dawn to dusk work, most of it with just horse and human labor, very few machines and modernization. And indeed, even the way they built their structures, there was a lot of manpower, but very few machines that could mill timbers and things, so they basically were just squaring off tree trunks and putting up their structures in such fashion. This type of building is very romantic to us today, but it requires a lot of cross bracing that eats up a lot of internal space. It also is generally sheathed in something that's about as drafty as a Venetian blind. So you've got dirty, drafty, cold, prone to lightning and fire structures. It was the best they could do, and they served their purpose. But I want to point that out because I was actually rather surprised at some of the developments that were concurrent to the gentleman's farm movement. Besides it being a bucolic retreat for the wealthy, a lot of these farms, even though the owners weren't doing the actual management, they were wise enough, or it was in their nature enough, to build structures that weren't necessarily going to be just antiquated the minute they were done. They built very efficient farms, and in a lot of ways they were progressive and may have contributed to the advancement of agricultural practices. This is a book, a treatise, and some vignettes from it, that was written by an Alfred Hopkins. If this name is familiar to some of you, he is the architect of Ellowa Farm Group, and he did a lot of work out east. He published this book on about modern farm buildings, and if we just look at the top of this, you can see being suggestions for the most approved ways of designing the farm group on practical, sanitary, and artistic lines. And these are some of the sections taken from the book. These are stanchions and sections through efficient floor systems. And here we have a very ingenious method of ventilating using the cupolas. All those elements are present on Meadowood Farm, and they're all functional. They're not just romantic applique. And you can see here from the frontispiece the actual aesthetic significance of the designs is evident. They had to look beautiful as well, and here they actually talk about some of the milking machinery And if you wonder how much of this were they actually thinking about at Meadowood, well, the guy was right next door, so it made sense they probably all knew each other and shared information. And actually, this is a 1920s local pamphlet, an advertisement for Meadowood Farm. And in this, it advertises and proclaims modern facilities, superior milk and egg-producing animal stock. They had Guernsey cows, which produce high butterfat content milk, and also they had red leghorn chickens, I guess are supposed to be a good breed. The highest degree of nutritional value, state-of-the-art sanitation, delivery conditions, emphasis on quality of taste and freshness, and delivery to the consumer with 6 hours. So people in Lake Forest were getting their milk, eggs, and cream from Meadowood Farm for a while. And here's some more pages from the book, Hopkins' book. The value of this slide is to show you, here's Elwood Farm actually, which he designed, but their book is just loaded with these rational layouts for farm group buildings. Gone are the ideas of keeping the farm building barn far away from everything because it might catch fire. Here they integrate and link up all the adjacencies so that there's efficient internal circulation. They use the buildings to form outside yards, and they do it all over. This one I think was owned by Tiffany, or maybe it was this one, and you could see here that this has that sort of country vernacular style, and then it also has a very rational, almost Beaux-Arts-like plan. So these are modern farming advances that were reflected in these gentlemen's farms, and that was something I wasn't quite prepared for, so that we're really dealing with buildings that have a romantic expression in their style and detailing, yet inside the buildings they're particularly up to date. Now here's some more examples of from the book, and when you're out there, just for your information, here's the cow trough that's on the side of the carriage house. It's a spitting image of the one from Hopkins' book. And when we were first out at the site, Jan and Paul and I were all sitting up in this building, this structure here. It had a raised floor, and we were being told that they put the cow manure in there, and that it actually was pulled by a trolley from the main barn. And I thought that whole idea sounded like somebody was just doing too much thinking. But actually, in the Hopkins book that Paul Bergman lent me, and I have to thank him for that, they actually show this trolley that one man can push along this sky rail and hook up to your barn and take out to a compost. I'm calling this the Compost Reservoir for the sake of the Willisons. I think it's referred to as other things, but you can see that the book then goes ahead and describes and recommends a pergola treatment of this, so that when grown over with vines, unless you're going along there with your compost, or I guess the naturalists would call that today the organic compost green tea. You would think for all the world that was a garden feature. Now what they did with this is that they allowed it to decompose, and then they had piping, and that would leach it out into the field. So it was really kind of an efficient and very high-tech approach to farming. Pardon me, this clicker is a little touchy. What I think we'll do now that we've talked about the modern nature of the functional aspects of the building, we should talk a little bit about the architecture. You're going to see so much of that when you go over there today. Clifford Lenner strongly desired the French Norman style for his farm, and actually he was over in Europe looking at that style when he was over there after World War I. I think the architectural profession in general had moved away from more of the classic neoclassical styles by the turn of the century. A decade or so later, a lot of people were embracing this sort of French Renaissance and French Norman style architecture. Was more picturesque. It found great favor in a lot of suburban contexts. So it wasn't out of keeping that this would be his choice. And in fact, these are images taken right from our public library books of some buildings in Normandy, which is exactly what he had in mind. And I thought the round barn feature was just an incorporation of an American element, but actually I found in here that some of these French farms had these round structures, and they referred to them as colombiers. And you can see the striking resemblance of this double auger roof, the curving connected buildings to form an edge condition and contain space. And keep an eye on our main cow barn, because it features an exterior stair that when I saw this, I thought, well, maybe he was looking at this exact book. And again, here's some sketches from traveling architects in France, American architects. Here's the farm group buildings that are actually enclosing space. So we have the modern farm designers in America and also the old vernacular designers doing the same thing. Here's some architect sketches. And again, the double auger roof of the round barn. And this black and white photo from about the early 60s lends itself well to kind of show you how closely and faithfully the architect has copied that style and then reinterpreted. Here are some tower precedents in Normandy, and then if you look at our towers, they're almost spitting images of those towers. It's really remarkable, isn't it? Now here again, I want to show you Jens Jensen's plan with the alley running straight up to show the house. It was never built, but just for your information, these are some examples of what may have been appropriate manor home designs. Now, who is he going to get to do all this marvelous work? And the architect of this project was Ralph Varney. He was from an old New England family as well, like his client. He attended Exeter and Harvard. And what I think is really significant and probably had a lot of impact on the design of Meadowood Farm is that he won the Rome Prize in Architecture in 1906. And that's no small feat. Only a few people are awarded that every year, and it allows you to study in Rome. Now, this is an actual Varney design that's just up the street on Waukegan Road. It's called Old Stones, and Gage Lane is right here, and some of you may have seen this. And if you look at it, you can see sort of the rambling, asymmetrical quality of parts of it, and then also it belies a little bit of rational courtyard planning. These are a list of some of his projects. He was active in Chicago and New York. And this is a little slide just to show some of the activities an ordinary student at the Academy in Rome would be involved in. And you can see here they're going to be documenting masterpieces from antiquity and learning firsthand contours and detailing. The school classroom alone was a wonderful design. And they firsthand would go up and actually measure these things. I don't know if you can get me to go up on a ladder like that, but I believe that's one way to understand scale and proportion from afar and from up close. And they also would study these public spaces. To think for a minute about the winter exercise cow yard. I mean, it doesn't sound very formal and civic, yet enclosure is enclosure, and they were studying all these things over there, and they were also producing drawings like this where my conjecture that he was dealing and being very seriously attentive to intersecting axes and arrangements, you can see that they would have been honing their skills at the Academy. Here's some houses he did in Glencoe, and then these are interesting. These were, I think, done shortly after or possibly before Meadowood Farm, but if you look at the cottage plans, when I put that plan back up, you can see these are actually quite like the cottages at the Meadowood Farm that he designed for the farm workers. What we'll do now, and I'm going to try to go as fast as I can here because I want to make sure I don't have you do too long of a sit. We're going to go back to our key plan, and we're going to look a little more closely at the round barn. Here's a nice view of it that shows the two appendage wings. This was actually a cow barn area in here that they would take the cows out into the cow yard. It's been with overhead garage doors, it became the garage for the new 11,000 square foot residence here. And just for purposes of why the round barn, here is a rectangular barn layout as opposed to a circular barn layout, and many people feel that you can close more area with fewer materials by doing a round barn, as well as achieve a greater efficiency and adjacency of functional program elements. And here actually is an American precedent for a round shaker barn in New Lebanon. And here's some views inside. We don't have the luxury of knowing what the barn looked like, so I thought I might give you a little bit of this to start off with. And then here's that exterior stair on the southern appendage of the round barn. This is a view here. It's hard to see the garage, but it's behind this hedge here. This is the rear of the barn, and this is the attached tower. And our little tramway for the compost green tea would have probably come out of this door. It's the shortest route to the tank. But what's really spectacular, and we're going to be allowed to see today, is the great interior space of the dome. And I spent a little time talking about the timber frame barn because I wanted to set up the idea of this as almost an exact opposite method of construction. Here you can see that with thin, lightweight truss members, there's no need for cross bracing. Actually, the round barn form helps in that regard because you can make a tension ring at the top of the masonry wall. And this allows you to stack this hay up as high as you want, one person probably, with the use of all these pulleys, and they're still in place. And you'll see how this was all probably something could be done by one individual, one farmhand, could stack up a vast amount of hay. I think your average cow eats a bale of hay a day, so you need a lot of material. But it's just extremely elegant, is it not? And these individual truss members were probably, could have been prefabricated and brought out to the site. And here we have materials that come out milled and put up by a few people, as opposed to the tree trunk method put up by a whole swarm of workers. And just as a quick formal analysis, where did we get this shape from? If one goes back to Hopkins and the idea of a linear arrangement of covered areas, if they are not adjacent, you can't get to it very well when it's raining and in the winter. So the idea is that you keep everything under one long roof. And if you have a barn element here, and then give thought to maybe imposing the round form on it, and then at that point you take that round hinge form and then you crank these things a little bit to start creating enclosure. And then as a final manipulation, you take this portion here, curve it over, you get nice northern protection from the north winds in the winter to make the cow yard a little more inhabitable for the animals. You also allow these openings to be open more or less all the time because they give it a southern exposure. Then the breaks in the link allow passage. I believe that this was also a covered open passageway. When you look at it, you'll see that it has exterior wall features and doors and windows. And this would allow the milking to go on in the main barn, and then the milk to be taken quickly away from the animals so it doesn't get contaminated with bacteria, brought into this area, probably cooled, and then from there taken over to the milk house perhaps for further processing. You can see the little farm worker cottages here and how the walls all contribute to this this outdoor enclosure, and think of his experiences in Rome. And in fact, if we talk a little bit more about the whimsical character of that gate, a view from the east here shows the two flanking cottages that would have just been mirror images, and then right about here and here, and you'll see later on, are these stone piers, and we have the image of a cow's head on one side and a pig's head on the other side, just as sort of I think a sculptural embellishment of the importance of that axis to them. Here are some close-up details of the round barn and pendage, and we can see that there's a very large overhang here, which affords the opportunity to do a lot of structural bracketing and detailing. And then also notice, though, that this completely shields this walkway on the outside of the building so that a worker could come in and out of his quarters where he would be living and be unencumbered by any moisture. Bacteria likes moisture. I mean, the whole thing just seems to be form follows function to a point where it almost rivals the downtown guys in their skyscrapers and elevators. What we do now is go to the carriage barn, and I chose this aerial photograph to kind of give you the whole thing in one shot. These were the three bays for the carriages. This was a pony barn originally. There was a blacksmith shop in here. You'll see the two little chimneys. This was storage for, I think, a car or two Model T. And this area here was the carpenter's shop. This is the wagon shed. This is where they would have pulled in their wagons and kept them out of the rain. And here's that pediment, as I talked about before, and then a little better view of what would have been always open for the carriages, almost like a carport. And then this area over here for the pony barn. This is a plan that Bart Willison had actually conjured up for me, showing a plan view of these things, and you can see there was a lot of room in here for the original farm layout. And then this is the interesting adaptive reuse plan. It has match lines here, so it's as long as the upper one. But they turned this area into living room. You'll see it. This is dining here. They introduced a fireplace. They took the blacksmith shop and turned it into the kitchen. They've taken the Model T yard and turned it into some family rooms. And this is where Bart's, the old pony shed is Bart's craftsman shop, where he does a lot of interesting work, making lamps and so forth, and you'll see a lot of interesting art. Bert's a very talented artist. Here's some interior views of his place. This is the great open door that was had a glass wall system put in. And here's a really nice wide-angle shot of the whole thing. This is actually the old, I think there were 4 huge oak doors here, and that got changed out for the window wall of the living room. And this is an interesting section. I wasn't prepared for this when I saw it, because you notice a very picturesque swaling here and curving over these arches, but it's really kind of hard to imagine that they've done here with the trusses, they've created actually a curve here, right? Maybe about a quarter of the span over, and this is a very clever way to introduce that vernacular look. Now, during the adaptive reuse process, these trusses had to be snipped and reconfigured somewhat to allow the bedrooms to take place, but it was all done sensitively, and I think it's very successful, as you'll see, and much to their credit, they put the dormers for the second floor in the rear of the house so they don't change the front facade. Here's some close-ups of the actual details associated with these openings. And I really think this is wonderful that the architect has taken the time and effort to design these so that the different openings of the different functional groups have different expression. The arch group here, the carriage, is different than the opening to the blacksmith shop, and this carpenter shop gets a different treatment as well. There's our compost reservoir that's currently used as a gazebo. You may get to go up there if you desire. This is our key plan showing the farm workers' cottages, and here again is that view from the corner. As I talked about, they're identical plans. They're just inverted and rotated, and that asymmetrical massing just does a marvelous job of hiding the fact that there's repetition involved. Here's a close-up view of the side. Here's a real close-up view of the materiality and the handling of it. Bart was telling me that when the son of Clifford Leonard was still alive, he was living in the chicken coop. He said that a lot of the workers on these buildings were Europeans that had emigrated into the United States. Some of them lived in Highwood, so they all had been trained in Europe, and I think it really shows. The design has to be good, but also the actual builders and artisans have to be skillful as well. These are some views of the farm worker cottages from different angles. Here's some views you'll see firsthand of the backside of the cow gate. This is the remnants of the gate. It's in kind of a charming, somewhat abandoned look that they're retaining. And here's some of the curving stone walls that they've been able to use for landscape plantings. If we look at the Jens plan again, we can see that it leads out to Waukegan Road, and sure enough, if you go by there, you'll see the entry piers that still exist, and these are spit-in images of the piers that we have inside the actual enclosure. And these walls actually feature very interesting gates. They're all functional and make sense. And then there was the introduction of garages with respect to the farm workers' cottages in order to make those things function as adaptive reuse. Here's some cottage garden plantings. Now we move to the milk house, and one sees from the front, and it's a very charming structure. It provides a lovely home for the Geldermans and their young family too. So all these structures are surviving. Bart actually has raised his family in the carriage house, and in some of the farm workers' cottages. People are living there in their later years, and here they're raising a young family, and I'll speak in high praise of the quality of life on the farm. Also, this has undergone very little change since its early days as the milk house. And here's a side view that shows the attached silo, the side view of the milk house, and then these are additions done on the back side in order to bring it up to contemporary standards of living. And finally, we'll visit the chicken house. This is a rather dynamic picture of a chicken house, I thought. This is the first remodeling that would have been done by Leonard's son. In the 60s, it features these marvelous cupolas, and they have a stunning picturesque effect, but remember the sections that show them as operating vented cupolas and the great array of windows would have been the kind of thing that would be required for a chicken house. And again, if you take some of the images from the Hopkins book and apply them to this design, you see that form follows function there. It's a current view of the chicken house. And now in conclusion, I think we can safely say that that the Meadowood Farm group is a significant example of late 19th century and early 20th century revival architecture, in this case French Norman architecture, with regard to its inclusion in the American gentleman farm movement. Unfortunately, the farm only operated for less than 10 years. I think that the Great Depression may have had a severe effect on the operation of the farm, and therefore the main house was obviously never built. A lot of the grounds were never completed. But the fact that it did sit vacant and relatively unused for a few decades, but then on its own accord was able to be resurrected and preserved in its current state by the hard work and vision of the current homeowners is a very interesting aspect of this project. It didn't need public funding to survive. It did it on its own, and I think that's an interesting characteristic of this. If you were to contrast it with, say, well, even Eloa, I mean, you know, that was done with like public funding. Eventually had to rely on some private funding, but I think the real success of Meadowood Farm is that it lent itself so well through its compelling architectural design and actually well-constructed systems of load-bearing walls and modern trusses and so forth that I think we can say that it's a testament to adaptive reuse as buildings. And I also want to say that lest we are accused of chauvinism for referring to these enclaves in the male dominated reference to the gentleman farm, I'd like to leave you with this image that shows you Mrs. Durand of Crabtree Farm fame in Lake Bluff. This is still a working farm, by the way. Here she's posed with her elegant herd of, I think these are Holstein cows, high milk producing cows. So hope you enjoy your visit later today.